Hey, Pastor Mike here. I just want to thank you for tuning in and let you know that we have more resources like this available for you on our website. Just a quick note before we begin though. While resources like this can help you grow in ways that God has ordained for you, they are no replacement for gathering with your local church on Sunday. And on that note, if you're not currently connected somewhere, we want you to know you're always invited to Grace Pointe. Visit our website for time and location, and we hope to see you soon.
Of the sermon topics most preferred by the public, according to one survey given, the following were preferred over today's topic: end times, signs of the end times, the book of Revelation, the Antichrist, not fun stuff, mind you, prophecy, tribulation. Tell us about suffering, anything but money. Family, prayer, postmodernism, love, alcohol, marriage, Mormons, and parenting. That's true, because I couldn't make up that list with Mormons just haphazardly thrown right in the middle of it. All preferred, notice it's noticeable. Money, something we all deal with in our daily life, and yet no one wants to hear about that. You might have heard it said Jesus talks about money more than any other subject. And this is kind of true and kind of a total lie. Here's what one author says. Jesus mentions money, yes, more than any other topic. But, for instance, out of 39 parables, 11 mention money. That's a big deal. A quarter? So is Jesus concerned with money? Well, to add emphasis, they also say 1 out of every 7 words Jesus says mentions money. 1 out of 7 words. Like 15% of the time he's talking about money. I didn't know that. And that's been overemphasized by so-called preachers today as a justification to try and pad the offering basket. To overstate what Jesus wasn't stating at all, in other words. For instance, think of this. Look at those parables, those mentions of money. Is Jesus actually teaching on money? If you look at them, most of the time, no. He's using money as an illustration to talk about a hard issue. And that's different than talking about money. Why does he use it? Because money is something that passes through every hand, meaning he can come to any people of any culture at any time and teach a lesson, and because they all know what money is and have had money pass through their hand, he can use it as a teaching device. Well, Pastor, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. That's not what I was taught. Well, Jesus talks about food more than money, and yet you don't see good eating habits taught from many pulpits. Although, maybe that's a problem too, in and of itself. I need some of that preaching. And yet we hear prosperity preachers use what Jesus doesn't say so often. Kenneth Copeland is one that comes to mind, in order to rob people to fund private jets and Bentleys and Rolexes for the pastor. It is a pandemic of its own in our time. The prosperity gospel is, right? Give to God and he will give back to you. Like he's a genie. So here's the reality. The reason Jesus mentions money is as a teaching device very often. But there are times he does want to talk about money. So we have to teach about money in the church. What do you end up with if we just say we're people of faith and we don't talk about matters that are important to the practical life? You end up with a bunch of faithful, debt-ridden people. Uninformed, untaught, without clarity to know that spending is a spiritual matter that God does talk about. One of two things tend to happen because of the abuses in our time concerning people standing at pulpits trying to do what I'm doing today and abusing it. It gets abused, and pastors know it's abused, so they usually do one of two things. They either start abusing it themselves, or they just don't talk about it because it's a touchy subject. And I'm convicted by what Paul says in Acts 20 to the church at Ephesus. I have no blood on my hands because I've preached to you the whole counsel of God. Which means when we get to verses 13 through 21, I'm inclined to preach them, even if they rub someone wrong, even if today's your first day visiting. I'm sorry that it was on a day that we're talking about money. This is not what matters most to us, but it should matter because the Bible talks about it, and Jesus does want to talk to us about it and teach us how to have a fruitful life that is not consumed by money. The challenge before me today, and really before any of us when we sit down to study this topic, knowing that we've heard it abused and that maybe some of those abuses have turned into our actual beliefs and we don't know that we need to be deprogrammed of some bad theology. The challenge is to just answer the question, what did Jesus actually say? And that my goal to you is today is to teach you what Jesus actually says. And the trick is to not overstate it and make him say something he doesn't say, and not understate it and miss the teaching that he does want to present to us in what he teaches this man and the crowd today. This week and next week, Jesus is going to broach the topics of stinginess with us, doubt, greed, worry, anxiety, which I know is related to money, anxiety because of perceived scarcity, jealousy. We're going to talk about generosity, which is God's design for us. And ultimately, this is all about our trust in God at the end of the day. So, the subject of covetousness, how does it arise here? Because chapter 12 is somewhat of a sermon. And if you were here last week, you know Jesus was talking to his disciples about essentially the Great Commission. You're to be my mouthpiece. You're to testify to me wherever you go. And don't worry, I'll give you the words to say. And then this happens. This next slide. Some guy stands up and goes, hey, I hear you talking about important things, but I got something more important. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Have you ever been talking about something really important with your kids and they go, when are we going to eat? Just talking about heavenly matters, your eternity, the weight of the world. And this guy's like, I got bigger problems. I'm the second born, and my brother wants his legal right to keep the inheritance, which would have been the practice. And this kind of goes to show what Jesus dealt with regularly. These are the people coming to him. People who are thinking about their small problems. Is that not us? Often we come into the house of God not wanting to lift up his name and experience his presence together and joyfully exalt his name, but to say, Jesus, I got this thing. I got this thing that is just so important to me right now. So here's what happens. I'll read the passage, and we're going to see that Jesus teaches that the fool imagines an existence based on what he can gather and stockpile. This guy is a fool, and this is what he's imagining, is an existence based on what he can gather and stockpile. Read verses 13 through 15. Someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, I tell my brother to divide the inheritance. But he said, Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you? That doesn't mean Jesus doesn't have an eternal right to decide all things on earth and heaven. He's just saying, hello, that's not my purpose. I didn't come down here to settle little squabbles over something that's going to be burned up one day anyways. And he said to him, Take care, be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. This man's question, it's jarring, but again, it goes to show people bringing real problems. And they've heard rumor, there's this guy with the wisdom to settle anything. So many people are coming to him with their problems thinking, I've heard rumor, if he can heal, if he can cure leprosy, he can convince my brother. He's convincing Jewish people to change religions, to believe in the Messiah, to believe in the fulfillment of their religion, which we know, according to world history, created a great schism between Judaism and Christianity, which is why I say a new religion, but it's really the same as it's always been. So surely he can convince my brother. So this man is concerned, though, with the wrong thing. Right off the bat, Jesus says, don't think this way. Take care for your soul, because a life does not consist of the abundance of possessions. And he can see right in through this man, like he's transparent. We don't know if the father was still alive. It's kind of messed up if he was. We don't know if this guy has any legal right to ask for what he's asking. My guess would be he doesn't, but you kind of have to infer that. So there's some things we don't know. But at a minimum, this is a younger brother talking about presumably the firstborn and just wanting something that doesn't seem to be due to him. And Jesus says that Jesus doesn't say you're being greedy because you want something that's not due to you. He's just saying, listen, your motivation is wrong. You're wanting just to gather into storehouses. And that's not what life is about. Jesus is real existential, real philosophical here. What do you think life is about, friend? One author says an inheritance is also a very strange thing to talk about publicly. He shouts this out at Jesus among, like, no shame. No shame. I wish my dad was here. He's not here today, right? No? Okay. This is kind of disgusting. Like, Jesus, when my dad dies, can you convince... Not, can you keep my dad alive? Can you bring my dad back from the dead? Like, nothing for the dad's sake or for his relationship with the dad. He just wants what he thinks he should have access to. This really shows that this man is gathering things to himself, like Jesus says, right? What's noticeably absent is he's not trying to draw near the relationships around him and say, oh, I want my dad for longer. I wish I could have my dad back. Would you restore my brother's relationship? He's not like grabbing all the relationships and holding them close. He's like, no, forget those. I want to grab the things and pull them close to me. Jesus is about to teach this man that life is not about that. Meaning that joy cannot be found in things. Meaning cannot be found in things, money, and inheritance, or whatever comes with the inheritance for this man. Flocks, a household, servants, we don't know. Reputation, who knows? We just don't know what was part of the package here. But we know that the man wanted that more than he wanted his dad. Or a good relationship with his brother. And because it is sin that is stirring this motivation, Jesus calls it out, covetousness is stirring this motivation that changes the way this guy sees the world. It kind of goes without saying, but I think I need to say it. Sometimes sin causes our emotions to speak louder than reason, which is where we see the idea of covetousness turn into the actionable greed, I'll say, where we go to any length to get anything we want, and we step over whoever we have to. How does it get that way? Why do we make the decisions we do? It's because the emotion, the feels, the vibes, young people, are speaking louder to us than reason, than fact, than what our brain is saying. Our brain is saying, Dad matters, the brother matters. Shouldn't you be embarrassed to say these things out loud in front of a crowd? And no, I feel a certain way about money, so I will say anything and do anything and cross my family relationships and insult my other siblings and insult the whole household and the clan and other Jewish people who are probably thinking, are you kidding me? This guy's representing us? Jesus, this is not who we all are. Don't let him speak on our behalf. Simple reason would tell him, stop gathering things. Do you think you can ever have enough? And something is so strong in him, the sin of covetousness, that his emotion is just trumping reason here. Gathering and storing up is an impulse. You all know what impulse is. It's that Snickers bar at the checkout line. Yeah, you heard me. But it's bigger than that. It's, I gotta have this because I see it in my neighbor's driveway. It's, I have to have even like well-behaved kids because everyone else seems to. We covet, we want what we see elsewhere, and my guess is this man has seen some rich folks in his day, and he wants what he wants in order to have what he thinks he needs. Gathering and storing up is an impulse so strong that we will gather and store up when reason says, stop it. You have enough. Reason is shouting in our minds, you have enough. And our impulse is like, I don't. I got to have more. And I know this is true because sometimes I go to the dump. And I look out and go, there's so much stuff here. Like we're talking like building size piles, size of this room, of trash. And the last time I went to the dump, I looked at this pile and I literally thought this. I went, everything here was once upon a time something that someone thought they couldn't live without. And they bought it, and they couldn't live without it until the day they went, I don't need this. Reason finally caught up. Reason always loses the race when it comes to what we want, because we got to have it, and we get it, and it's in the driveway, or it's on your desk, and you go, I don't quite feel the way I thought. I got what I want, and it just doesn't, So I kind of feel like I can infer, because I've lived some of this greed out in my life and gotten the thing I want, or achieved the paycheck. I used to work in IT. I made take my current salary, multiply it times a few. That's what I used to make. And I thought that was it, man. Like not having to look at the bank account, it. And it wasn't. And I don't say that publicly. I'm more ashamed of it. Let me be very clear. I'm more ashamed that I ever had to go to that extent to learn that lesson. I'm not saying that like, look what I've done. Because it's embarrassing. When you are like this guy and you have to learn the lesson the hard way that, oh, this didn't matter and I was chasing the wrong thing. And Jesus said, did you think that's what life was about anyways, Pastor? So he let me for a season go on like this guy. It wasn't about an inheritance, but it was what I could store up and stockpile in my own life. So I'm speaking out of personal experience here a little bit, but I want to be textual. I don't want to get off and start telling you about my experience, okay? We're going to find out later this man has a deficiency in his relationship with the Lord. And that is going to kind of come full circle back around to what we just read and kind of point out that's what Jesus was saying. Life is not about what you can gather. He's going to have to teach us what life is about. We'll get there. But this man has a problem. He's storing up, he's gathering, he's doing what we do in our time. For this man to believe that life is about what you can gather and stockpile, he has to imagine a reality where it is about what you can stockpile. And then he's got to escape into that reality. He's got to fabricate a false reality where life is about what you can gather up and store in the 401k and everything, and the boat and the beach house and everything, and just, that's what it's about. And because it's not, we know that he has to fabricate a reality where it can be, where he can go live and be delusional. So, if the meaning of life is not gathering and stockpiling for ourselves, why do it? It's not a rhetorical question. Why do you do it? Well, Jesus now breaks into a teaching, and he's going to tell us why it is that we have this strong impulse to hoard. You ever watch that show, Hoarders? And you think, oh, that's so disgusting. I wouldn't. Well, that's your spirituality. That's your emotions. That is us. We are hoarders. We are gatherers because we're people who want to be self-sufficient. Jesus teaches this parable of the rich fool in a sense, showing that this man he's talking to is the fool. We are the fool. And he starts by telling him and us how foolish we are not to realize the depth of our obsession. It was like my obsession was right in front of my face the whole time, and I didn't even see it. The fool doesn't realize the depth of his obsession. Verses 16 through 18. And he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced plentiful, and he thought to himself, okay, let me just ask you, I want to pause there. What would reason say? The man's yield was plentiful, and he thought to himself, anybody? What would be reasonable to think? Maybe I can give some of it away. Maybe I can share. That might be what reason does, right? Okay. This is why I say This is why my first point is the fool doesn't realize the depth of his obsession, because this is his first thought. And he thought, what shall I do? For now I have nowhere to store my crops. Pause. This means we already know he's rich, which means he can afford the food. Now, because of that, we already know he already has a barn full of food somewhere, so he's got backups. And now he wants backups for his backups. So what is his totally reasonable plan? I will tear down my barn and build a larger one. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. He's already rich, he already has a backup, and he is so determined to stockpile that it doesn't even cross his mind to do otherwise. He's got to bulldoze a barn. Some of you have barns. If you needed a bigger barn, what would you do? Would you bulldoze it, build a bigger one? Or would you reasonably think to yourself, it might be time to get rid of some stuff? And I know I don't have to explain this because we live in an area with a storage unit on every corner, and we won't stop building them. They just keep popping up. Corner of where's this property over here that they just bulldozed by my house? Nolte and Canoe Creek Road. We left for sabbatical, and our whole family had we didn't bet, but we had a wager going, right? We were like, what are they? We're going to come back from sabbatical, and there's going to be something built there. And someone's like, it's a Whataburger. I'm like, we're not getting a Whataburger. That'd be so random. And but you know what kept getting assumed? A car wash, a dental office, or a storage unit. And then we came home, and there was nothing there, because mankind bulldozes when we don't even have a plan. This is not an environmental sermon. This is about stockpiling and greed and needing to prep land when we don't have anything to put there. But I can feel reasonably assured that there will be storage units on it, because I know our obsession. I know we feel we need everything. And instead of being letting go of this world, we hoard and we hold to it and we cling. It's part of the fallen condition. He starts a parable off already in a secure position. He already has plenty, yet when he experiences a high yield crop, he doesn't think, I have plenty, and maybe some other rational thoughts. I can give, I can do something with this. He doesn't even ask God, Lord, why are you giving me such extra? What is your design for what you've given me? Jesus has painted the image of a fool who can never have enough. He can never have enough, so much that he will bulldoze barns and build bigger ones. And if this went on, there's a third and a fourth and a fifth barn somewhere out there in this parable, because he can never have enough if he doesn't repent. So why does he do this? What is the rich young fool chasing? What could possibly cause such obsessive, compulsive, irrational behavior? The fool's hope. He was building up hope, and his hope rests in a false assurance. Jesus tells us what he's chasing. What are you after? Where's this coming from? All those questions we could ask. What's motivating this guy? Jesus makes it clear. He wants hope. He wants peace. He wants assurance and security. And I will say to my soul, all of a sudden he's talking like a proverb writer, like a psalmist, like the wisest man in the world. I will say to my soul, what? The Lord is just and merciful and good, and how beautiful are your courts, O Lord. What will he say to his soul? Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Hallelujah. That's what he says in his inner being, in his inner spirit, and now I can relax, eat, drink, and be merry. This is what he's chasing. Security, what he thinks is peace. That's the only thing that can trump reason, is when what you're chasing is bigger than what you're ignoring, because the impulse is eat, drink, and be merry and provide it for myself. Ain't no one going to decide my destiny, says this guy. I'm going to have enough that I am secure. I see it. I can put my hands on my needs, and I have to rely on no one. You can see why the translators called this the rich fool. We find out his motivation, security. Anyone listening might ask, possibly because it's Jesus' design, can he ever have enough? Can he ever have enough? Did he truly get here? Do you think and that's the thing, getting to know this rich fool, I read this and I think to myself, he might have thought this, but give it a few days, give it another high-yield crop, or what about a national economic crisis? A little more life, and he's going to be right back where he was, chasing this attitude, chasing security, which means he can't have enough. Perhaps some of his listeners would have made good Americans today because they would have heard this story so far, not hearing the end of it, and thought, man, this guy had it all. God help us. This guy had it all. I wish I had barns to tear down. I wish I was so secure I could buy and sell a business or take $1 million hit and it not matter. Whoa! I wish I had what this guy had. Maybe you hear this parable and you don't like Jesus' teaching because you're going to get an inheritance one day, a big one, and you just don't want Jesus in your pocketbook. But Jesus is saying covetousness is a sin. It makes us act irrationally. It makes us behave like we are capable of being self-sufficient, self-starters, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps sort of people. This is why this text is so offensive to the American spirit, because it's kind of the opposite of how we raise our kids. Get a good job, be self-sufficient, never rely on. Don't even rely on the Lord. He knows that we're selfish. He knows that we can have what's mine is mine, what's mine gives me happiness, what's mine gives me the security to eat, drink, and be merry my way through this life. And that's really what I want, is I want comfort. I have to ask, how many of us see that money on payday? We log in, Bank of America, it hit, and we go, oh yeah, like it's another hit of a drug. Oh yeah, a little more money. A little more money. And 2 weeks later, you're like, where'd that money go? If you're anything like me, it's like, where'd that? 7 kids. That money disappears quick. Or 5 kids. 7 in our family. I don't know how I multiplied. That money disappears quick. But for many of us, what is our feeling? I want you to think about that feeling when, or if you're retired and you're on a steady income, when it hits every month, or if you get paid weekly, what do you feel about that? Does that ease your pain? Does it give you a little bit of endorphin release? The Lord knows we all share in common that we desire security, safety, and comfort, which is why he teaches us next, the fool plans only for this life. The fool plans only for this life. See, this is where Jesus gets at the heart of what's wrong with this way of living. Aside from that, it's illogical, it's logically inconsistent, it creates a never-ending merry-go-round of I have enough, I don't have enough, I have enough, I don't have enough. It will cause depression if you live this way. Aside from the obvious, Jesus says there's a under the surface spiritual issue living this way. But God said to him, to this fool, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you." In other words, he died. We don't know what happened. It's not like we have to know. The point is we're all going to die someday, and unexpectedly this man dies. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Let me paraphrase that. You can't take it with you. That's what this means. You can't take it with you. At some point, you're going to die, and Jesus is going to say, wow, you did great. Whose will it be now? Because it's not yours anymore. It's actually a silly pagan way of living. It's how the pharaohs lived. Gather a lot and be buried with my belongings. But this is not how Christians should be. We should be thinking, if we leave anything behind, let it go to the Lord. It's fine to leave things for your kids. I'm not saying be stingy with your kids. But my goodness, he stores up storehouse upon storehouse upon storehouse. And the central teaching is, what will that leave you when you can't take it with you? Why is he a hoarder? Because sinful urges speak louder than reason. Even though we know that we can't find security anywhere else other than in God, even though we know we can't find security anywhere else than in God, we feel I have to fend for me and mine, which always leads to greed. Jesus essentially says to this man, if you could, you'd take that inheritance that you feel is due to you and you'd bury it away in a barn. This man wants an inheritance. And Jesus is saying, in not so roundabout a way, you just want something to build a bigger barn and hog more things to yourself. So hear this today. It's still a timeless teaching. You can't take it with you. You can't take any of it with you. Have you ever noticed that at a funeral, there's never a part where a loved one stands in front of the crowd and pulls out a scroll and it's the financial portfolio of the deceased. And Arthur died with $6 million in his 401k. Why don't we do that? Why do we live as if that's what will matter? And the moment we die, all of that fades away. In fact, if we did that, would the family of the deceased not go, how dare you? Why? Why would they find it offensive? Because when a life has been called up, we literally then and only then acknowledge this teaching, that we can't take anything, that the only thing left to say is the life they lived in here. That's all we can look to, and that's all we want to share. In fact, what's ironic is who would be the only kind of person to want to hear off that scroll? People like this man. What was his inheritance? Did he leave anything? And more importantly, did he leave anything for me? The fool plans for this life and only this life. Jesus said this life is not measured by what you can acquire. So why can money and belongings consume us so much? Because we behave like it's all there is. It's a teaching from last week. If we fear man, it's because we fear that dying in this life is all that can happen to us. It's kind of like a theme that ends up carrying through the chapter. If you'd miss it if you didn't think about it. Remember last week, verse 4, we fear man because we fear what he can do to us, because we think that's all that can happen and that's the worst that can happen. And Jesus is teaching a similar, thematically similar lesson here, which is if you live in this life like this life is all there is, then you're going to hoard enough to get you to the finish line. You're going to think, what do I need? What do I need? And isn't that what retirement savings is? Isn't that literally what we do? It's entire banking systems built to this end, to figure out, to calculate my days like I can, and store up enough to make sure that I and my loved ones get there. That is living like this life is all there is. Our entire retirement and banking system is built much on this idea. Financial security for you and yours. Jesus is going to directly assess that next week. Address that next week. If this life was all there was, we just need enough to get to the ending. And that's not the reality. This life is not all there is. Jesus tells pastors, and we love doing this. He says, teach the rich man to fill in the blank. Oh, I hate this. I hate this part of being a pastor. My job is to teach rich people what to do with their money. I'm the last person they listen to. Let me tell you, in America in 2024, the last person they come to with $1 million to invest is their pastor. It's truth. They go find a barn to put it in. Most of the time. He says, charge the rich among you not to be arrogant, nor to set their hopes on uncertainty of riches, but set their hopes in God alone, who richly provides for everything. The rich among you are to do 3 things. Number 1, to do good. If you have money, do good with it. The rich among you are to be rich in good works. If you have money, be rich in good works. If you have money, you can do more works. You can. You can share the gospel as much as the next person as much as the person next to you in the seat next to you in the row. But you have more opportunity financially to do more and make the gospel spread wider and farer because of your riches. And number 3, if you're rich, you are to be generous and be ready to share. And if you do these things, you store up treasures for yourself and make a good foundation for the future, so that you will take hold of that which is really life. We got to unpack that. But just listen to this. This man, this fool in the crowd, his investment strategy for life benefits only himself and thinks about no one else. And number 2, this man's investment strategy for his life only helps himself in this life and helps no one for the next life. The fool cannot see that lastly, he is being stingy against God. The final thing Jesus addresses here is, do you realize how stingy against Yahweh you're being? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Those are the words right there, rich toward God. The interpretation of those words, the whole parable hinges on it. You interpret the whole thing based on what rich toward God means, because it's a strange way of saying be rich. Why not say giving toward God, generous toward God, rich toward God? God has everything. Like, what does this mean? Jesus, first of all, don't miss this. It's very key. Jesus takes the person who lays up treasure for himself, appeasing his own soul, providing his own supposed security, and he likens that person to someone who is not rich toward God. So what does it mean to not be rich toward God? I have 4 column application questions, if you will. Answering these questions, I think, will help us unpack what it means to be rich toward God. Number 1, does being rich toward God mean actually giving something? Yes. But remember, he doesn't need it. He doesn't need it. He's not like an earthly king who has to depend upon the taxation of his people in order to get what he needs. It's not that. It's not your Christian tax. You put money in the offering plate, you're not paying your dues. You're not joining a club. It's a sacrifice of worship. And if it's not a sacrifice, you're not giving the Lord enough. I know I'm not supposed to say that. I'm quoting Andy Hoffman. He used to be an elder here, right? I'll pass the buck to him. That was his strategy, and I love it. And I started applying it. I knew I wasn't giving enough until it became something that I have to go, okay, God's going to have to give extra. God's going to have to do something here. That's a little uncomfortable. That's what makes it a sacrifice of worship. Is it giving something to God? Yes, but we remember he doesn't need it. Psalm 50, every beast of the field is mine, 1,000 cattle on 1,000 hills, all that moves in the field. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High. In other words, your offering, including what you put in the offering box or you give online at this church or what you give to private ministries, your offering is an act of worship to God. It's a way of being rich toward God. That's what it means here to be rich toward God, giving toward God. So does it mean giving, does that mean it's good to give things to God? Well, it kind of goes without saying, but yes, it's good to give things to God. In fact, yes, it's the best, I would say, it's one of the best ways you can invest your money is by giving it to God. Matthew 6 says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Let me paraphrase that. Where you spend, that's what you love. And I don't know of any greater litmus test for whether or not you love your local church than whether you give to your local church. Where your money goes, that's where your heart is. I would hope you love your local church, you love your local church family, and you love the works happening there for the Great Commission. Does rich toward God mean giving him something measurable like money? I mean, what if it just means my heart? Is my heart more important than my money? Well, yeah. But why are you making it an or rather than an and? Are you sure you're not trying to build another barn? Careful. In fact, if anything, doesn't it mean both? Listen to this. Just think logically. How can a sinner give God money with sinful intent attached and that make him rich toward God? I think you'd agree that doesn't sound like it. That doesn't sound like the right interpretation. Okay, flip side of the coin. Likewise, how can a person claim to be spiritually rich but stingy against God with his money? Neither of them work. Both are logically inconsistent. How can we say either, God, you can have my money, but you can't have me, or God, you can have me, but you can't have my money? Both logically inconsistent. Both not the interpretation of rich toward God. Neither sounds like a reasonable interpretation of rich toward God. So if rich toward God means giving to God, this is number 4, how does that make me rich if I have less? That's the most valid question of all. And I hope you asked it. How can I be rich toward God if I give to God and I feel like I have less? Paul told us what we gain when we give. And I already said it in 1 Timothy 6, but listen, I'll say this again, and I'll highlight the 2 blessings that Tim is supposed to hear from Paul. When we are generous, when the rich are generous, when we share, we store up treasure for ourselves as a good foundation for the future, and we take hold of that which is truly living. Jesus told the man in the crowd, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And Paul supplies the companion teaching, which is to truly live is to give. Don't be confused. When you give, you're not taking hold of eternal life. That is found in Jesus Christ alone through the forgiveness of sins. And that requires crying out to God, forgive my sins. Don't be confused. When we give, we do not gain new life, but we finally start living this one, according to Paul. Did you hear me? When we give, we don't gain new life, but we finally start living the one we're living right now. Paul says you finally take hold of that which is truly living. Do you want to start to truly live? Be generous. I had someone this week say, thank you for telling me to be generous. I didn't want to, but I went and did it. And it felt so good to sacrifice time. God knows what truly living is. The cross itself is a big old gift with a bow on it to the world. It is our Father's heart and pleasure to give his most valuable possession to us. So we don't give to others to sanctify ourselves, because it doesn't work that way. We don't earn God's good grace when we give, but we become like God when we give, because God is a giving God. It's one of the first teachings I ever remember hearing in church. 15 years old, happened to go to Sunday school. I just popped in my mind right now. At First Baptist Kissimmee, happened to go to Sunday school first week. I know, why go to Sunday school in the first week? I was a loser. And no, the Lord was calling me. The Lord was calling me. And I remember we were talking about giving that morning. And it was this. The Lord wants us to be cheerful givers. Give not out of compulsion, right? For the Lord loves a cheerful giver. I wasn't saved. And the Sunday school teacher said, why do you think the Lord, kids, why do you think the Lord loves cheerful givers? I was unsaved, and probably the wrong Probably what I shouldn't have done. And I know just how arrogant I was. But the Lord spoke out of my mouth because God's a cheerful giver. And I had the Sunday school teacher look at me and go, yeah, yes. The saved kids in the room didn't get it. Clearly the Lord was calling me to salvation because he's a cheerful giver and he gave his son for us happily. So if you want to live in this life, you will live generously. Seems so simple. If you want to live in the next life, ask Jesus to forgive your sins. But if you want to live in this life, be generous. Jesus says it is better to give than to receive. It is more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed. I get a blessing when I give. What blessing is Jesus talking about? He's not talking about a blessing where if you sow a seed of $1,000, God's going to give you 100,000. That's the popular heresy of our day. The blessing he's talking about is the blessing of loving God with all you are and all you have to give. And knowing that when you give, you're helping someone else. Jesus leaves us with no reason to hog every resource that passes through our hand. And he gives us every reason to look beyond our life. If we could look down the tunnel of life and see the hospital bed where we're laying there, it's us, and we're near the end, and maybe we have grandchildren around us, and maybe your spouse is there. We don't know, right? We don't know the number of our days. But if we could look to that day and then somehow ask the Lord for the wisdom to peer beyond it into the next life, we can ask ourselves the important question, am I doing things right now, here and now, that will change what comes next for myself and for anybody else? Because if you didn't catch it, that second blessing was of 1 Timothy 6:19 wasn't just that you finally take hold of this life, but you build a firm foundation for the future. It's almost like what retirement is. You're building a firm foundation for the future. Are you making investments in this life that will change eternity for you and someone else? Because according to 1 Timothy 6, giving doesn't just benefit the person you're giving to, it benefits you. So generosity is an investment that benefits your future. We don't think that way. We think, net gain is I lose money, they gain a blessing. Wrong. Generosity is an investment that benefits your future, not just the future of who it helps. Greed benefits one. Generosity benefits two. I'll say it again. Greed benefits one for this life. Generosity can benefit two for the next. So next week, Jesus is going to talk to us about the practical applications of this, because the reality is he's going to talk to his followers, many of which don't know where the next meal is coming from and have great anxiety because of that. This isn't all there is to say on this topic. So next week, we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk about what Jesus addresses, which is what the world is really chasing after. And he's going to teach us how to have absolute confidence in God's provision so that we don't become storehouse barn builders and barn demolishers in our own lives. But I'll leave you with a couple of questions. Would you be content with the epitaph on your tombstone reading, "Here lies a fool who lived for himself and not for the next life"? How would you hope people would talk about you at your funeral? And more importantly, kind of picking up on the theme of last week where Jesus said, if you testify about me before men, I'll testify. I'll talk about you in heaven. What do you think Jesus is saying right now about your spending, about your investment strategy in this life? If we and the rich fool could hear this teaching, repent of our selfishness, turn from our greed, and live a life full of generosity toward God and full of generosity toward people, we'd be wise to take the advice and start living out what John Wesley said. He said, do all the good that you can, by all the means that you can, in all the ways that you can. in all of the places that you can, at all of the times that you can, to all of the people that you can, as long as ever you can. Lord, help us to love what you love and to spend on what you love. Lord, this is a tough teaching, and we, your people, have to repent of the ways that we hoard. Every one of us is guilty. Not one of us can leave here saying, I didn't need that teaching, I'm fine, or I'm not the rich man that 1 Timothy 6 was talking about. Not one of us is excluded from this teaching, because there are ways we can all be more generous. So Lord, would you stir that within us? We want it from the text. We see why reason tells us, why you teach us that it is better to give than to receive. It is more blessed to give than to receive. But Lord, our flesh is weak, and sometimes we have the attitude that what's mine is mine, and maybe us providers in the room think, I have mouths to feed. Lord, would you help us to look forward to next week and be reminded that you're a good God who cares for his people. And if you can feed the birds of the air, you can feed us. If you can clothe the lilies of the field, you can clothe us. Help us to rely upon you for our daily needs. Would you be generous to us that we may be generous to others in practical ways? We thank you most supremely for the cross. It will stand over eternity. 10 billion years from now, it will still stand as the pinnacle symbol of generosity. And we remember it now through communion and bless your name for your great giving to your people.